All right, so in addition to those physical changes, there's also some cognitive changes that continue during this time. Probably one of the most well-known ones are declines in memory. There are especially declines in what's called explicit memory. Explicit memory is memories that you can easily verbalize and talk about. They're sort of conscious, you're consciously aware of them. And episodic memory is affected the most. Episodic memory is basically your memory of like events that you have experienced from your own perspective. So memory challenges in episodic memory rise quite substantially. There's slower cognitive processing, reduced working memory, and so older adults tend to retain fewer details to remember later. They also tend to pay poor attention to context, and that can make it difficult to sort of store and then recall episodic memories. Their ability to recall things declines. In particular, they may have a hard time remembering the source of information, so it may be difficult for an elderly person to tell the difference between something that they imagined or dreamed versus something that really happened. And temporal memory suffers very drastically. Temporal memory is basically your memory of the order of events. So an elderly person may remember that something happened, but they might not remember it in the correct order that it happened, for example. And so these explicit memory tasks show the greatest decline out of all the memory systems. Implicit memory is basically the opposite of explicit memory. So it's your memory of things that are unconscious, that you're not consciously aware of. One piece of evidence that implicit memory is less affected is the fact that recognition is easier than recall. So an elderly person, for example, may not remember the name of somebody or the name of a movie they watched, but if they see the name, then they will recognize, okay, that's the correct name. Because they're being supported basically by those environmental cues that are helping to trigger the memory. Implicit memory declines are far less than explicit memory. Partially because implicit memory really just depends on familiarity rather than memory strategies. And semantic memory also declines less. So semantic memory is your memory of like words and their meanings, and also just sort of general facts and knowledge. That also declines less than episodic memory does. One of the greatest deficits that can occur is in what's called associative memory. So associative memory is basically where you're associating two or more items with each other. And so not just recalling the single item by itself, but recalling, okay, there's this item and it was connected to this one. So they have difficulty creating and retrieving links between pieces of information, especially associations between unrelated items. So for example, in this, the results of this graph are from a study where they either gave the elderly people like single words to try to memorize, or they gave them what are called word pairs, where you have two words paired together. And they gave them both recognition tests and recall tests. So in recognition tests, they would just see the list of words that they saw, plus a bunch of new words they had never seen before, and they just have to go through and say which ones they saw, which ones they didn't. A recall test would be where they just have to write down the words. And the older adults did almost as good as the young adults at the single item memory test, so just recalling the words by themselves. But if they had an item pair memory test, so in the item pair memory test, they're given one of the pair, and they have to recall the one that was associated with it. They did drastically worse on that than the younger adults did. And so it's really making those associations or those links between items that they tend to struggle with. They tend to basically not use strategies. That's been shown to be one of the contributors to this. They don't have good strategy use. One of the strategies that can help with these word pair tasks is called elaboration, which is basically where you try to come up with some sort of like story or meaningful way that the two words are connected to each other. And if they're encouraged to use that memory strategy, they tend to do better compared to if they're not encouraged to. So autobiographical memory, very similar to episodic memory, kind of your memory of experiences that you've gone through. And it tends to be stronger for remote events, so things that happened a really long time ago, and also things that are very, very recent. But there's kind of this dip in memory of things in between that. And this increase in memories from a specific time span is called the reminiscence bump. So people tend to have a lot of memories from the age range of about 15 to 30, and then less memories for items from like 30 to very recent to whatever age they are. This occurs across multiple cultures, so it's not just something that happens in the US or Western cultures. Novel experiences do tend to stand out, so if you go on a really interesting vacation to somewhere you've never been before or something during this dip period, then you're likely to remember that. Culturally shared and important life events are also preserved, so like weddings, your first job, things like that also tend to stand out. These events that happen from 15 to 30, they're probably so well remembered because there's a lot of things that happen during that time period that you're going to recall multiple times and share with other people. So things like weddings, for example, you get married, you're likely going to have a video of that, you're going to show it to people, you're going to talk about your wedding multiple times, and so that repeated recall and sharing of information helps strengthen the memory, and so then you have a lot of memories for that time period where some of those really important events are happening, and less memory for the time period where you're kind of stagnant. A lot of people, at least, are kind of stagnant, just living their career, living kind of the same day every day. Another type of memory is called prospective memory. This is basically your ability to remember to do something in the future. So like if you put your laundry in the washer this morning and you're trying to remember, okay, I got to put that in the dryer as soon as I get home, that's called prospective memory, where you're trying to remember to do something in the future. And elderly people often have a lot of difficulty with prospective memory. They tend to do better at event-based prospective memories than time-based. So event-based would be kind of like what I just talked about. I need to put the laundry in the dryer when I get home. That's typically easier than thinking, oh, I need to put the laundry in the dryer at 4 o'clock or something like that. So event-based tends to be easier than time-based. Older adults often will set up event-based reminders to compensate, maybe put a sticky note on a door or something so that they see it as soon as they get home. Another issue that they struggle with is once they've completed a task, it's harder for them to kind of deactivate that intention, and so they have a risk of repeating. And this is really important with things like medication. Older adults often have a lot of medication that they have to keep track of and take on a certain schedule. If they're trying to hold this memory of, okay, I need to take this pill, I need to take this pill, and then they take it, they may still have that kind of cycling through their head, I need to take this pill, I need to take this pill, and so they may end up taking multiple doses, and in extreme cases can overdose if something like that happens. So they really benefit from a system of reminders that regularly schedule tasks completed. So using, again, smart devices, things like that to help have a schedule is really important.